Welcome to the conversation with Al McFarland. I'm your host, Al McFarland. So instead of presenting you a live program today, I'm sharing with you one of my favorite episodes, a show that shows you how we've molded the show that you've come to know and love. And while you're enjoying this show, I'm going to be working with my team to make the program even more informative, more insightful, and even more inspiring. And if you haven't already, I'd like you to show your support for the conversation with Al McFarland by subscribing to the Inside News YouTube channel. This way you'll get alerted about and never miss new episodes, show clips, and special features only available on the Inside News channel. And you can find us on YouTube at Inside News MN. To make it easier, I've got a link in the description on this video. Well, thank you again for all your support this year. I can't wait for you to see all that we are preparing for 2023. Now, my friend, sit back and enjoy this conversation with Al McFarland. I'm Al McFarland. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarland. Today is Monday, September 12th, 2022. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along. On Mondays, we call the program Governance at the Neighborhood Level. And we do that in honor and in cooperation with our friends in neighborhoods in Twin Cities, particularly our association with the Hawthorne Neighborhood Council. Diana Hawkins and Dee Phillips have been regulars and co-conveners of this project in their leadership of the Hawthorne Neighborhood Association or Hawthorne Neighborhood Council in North Minneapolis. It's stellar event called the Hawthorne Huddle, a monthly convening of business and civic, political, cultural, educational leaders. We want to build on that and bring and invite other people in community, in neighborhoods, representing neighborhoods to address their concerns, their issues, their ability to be with each other, to create community. So that's what we do on Mondays, governance on the neighborhood level. Today we have, first of all, let me introduce and say hi to my regular co-host here, Brenda Loud-Gray. Brenda, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
I'm good. How was your weekend?
Oh, kind of sad down here, Al. We had 3 young men, postal workers' sons, who died of fentanyl in 2 weeks.
Wow.
So, it's an epidemic and it's got to be addressed. It's not just in Santa Fe, New Mexico. But anyway, we can find joy in our days still.
We have to. Well, let me bring in our partners here, Diana Hawkins and Dee Phillips. Diana, Dee, good afternoon to both of you. Thank you as always for being collaborators here with the Monday program. And Diana, I know you'll say we feel you to Brenda because we've experienced the same thing with deaths from drug overdoses, opioid addiction, but also gun violence. And it's almost beyond the epidemic level. It's frightening. Diana, but we had a good weekend, though, with the open streets, I believe, as far as I can tell.
We had a good weekend out with open streets. It was reported that there was no drama, no gunfire, none of that. Everybody had a really, really good time. We had a good time at the backpacks. We gave over 100 backpacks away. We had people get lead tested. They got vaccinated. But I'm not going to take up too much time because I see Dr. Mueller has got to go, and I want to allow her time. How about you, Dee?
Well, like you say, we had a good time at the backpack event. It was a good day.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
Great. Well, you mentioned Dr. Mueller. Let's bring her on right now. Commissioner Heather Mueller. Dr. Mueller runs the Minnesota Department of Education. She's here along with a colleague, Dr. Macarre Traynham. They both are here and we want to talk to them about education. Good afternoon, and welcome to the conversation. Dr. Mueller, first of all, give an update, sort of a status report as you would to the community about where we stand with our objectives in education and diversity. You've released some reports that I've asked about. Give us an update.
Well, thank you very much for having us on today. We really appreciate it. I think that what we know is that there are a number of pieces that we have really worked toward to really look at, one, diversifying the educator workforce, and also recognizing that we need to make sure that the educational opportunities that we have for our students as well as for our families are representative of the students that are in our schools and in our state. And so the way we think about that is really looking at not only diversifying in access, but also in participation and representation, because we believe that in the diversification in those three areas, it's really going to be able to lead to the outcomes that we know each and every student deserves. I think one of the things that we're really trying to be able to do, and in partnership with Dr. Traynham, is I had the opportunity to step into the commissioner role in April of 21. And the very first thing that I did was create and hire, which was probably a brilliant hire in Dr. Traynham, in develop an equity, diversity, and inclusion center to not only help to build up supports for our schools and our charter schools across the state, but also internally, in recognizing that if we have work that we need to be able to do externally, we also have work that we want to do internally. And so we believe that by really focusing on not only economic and geographic and racial and ethnic diversity, but recognizing that diversity is also based in the geography and based on the access that our students and families have.
So based on the objectives you set forth, how do you grade yourself? How is Minnesota doing in terms of achieving articulated goals? The mission has to be the best outcomes possible for every student in Minnesota. Minnesota is doing quite well for students in general, white students in particular, but quite poorly for students of color, particularly Black students. How have your policies, strategies both addressed and succeeded against some daunting challenges?
Well, I think that what's important is first and foremost to recognize that we have an education system that was not built for every single student to succeed. And so in order for us
what does that mean? What does that mean?
Well, it really means that what our education system built 200 years ago was built primarily for white males, affluent white males. Mm-hmm. And so in an education system that has started to, that has shifted, right? The population of students that are engaging in school and public education has shifted, but not the structure. And so I think that our role as the Department of Education is to look at the current system and structure and revise and revamp and dismantle areas where we know are inhibitors for every single student in our state.
Dr. Traynham, jump in. How do you see your department, your mission in addressing that? And what's the status? How do we grade? How do ordinary citizens grade the state so far? Go ahead. Welcome.
Yeah, first, thank you, and I appreciate being here. Glad to be here. And I think you're asking some great questions. The reality is we have a long way to go, right? This was not started in this era, but many, many years ago, decades, centuries ago, by which this has begun. And the work that we're trying to do out of the EDI Center is both internal and external, as the commissioner has said, that we recognize that in order for us to ask for people within the state to think about and to do things differently, we have to start with that process ourselves. And so within the agency, we have been working to build out our own understanding, starting with the ideals of EDI, and we've described equity, diversity, and inclusion as equity being about unlearning and relearning, right? There are behaviors and ideals and ideologies that we have to unlearn and then relearn what's needed in order to bring about a more unified environment, one that is cultivated and cultured for people to know that they not just are included, but that they belong within the space that they're in, right? And so trying to build out the ideals of a cross-cultural community, recognizing that people show up differently across the board, right? Across the board, we show up differently. And so how do we come together to not tolerate, but to be accepting of differences as well as similarities that we carry? And so starting with this idea of equity, which is, as we've defined it, unlearning in order to relearn, moving towards the ideals of diversity, which is knowing that people are represented and they're valued, and then moving us towards inclusion, which is really about building this cross-cultural community that ultimately builds out a critical consciousness within us to be able to look at what's happening, evaluate what's happening, recognizing how I might be doing things that are harmful, and how do I stop those things from taking place?
How much of that has to do with the number of teachers of color in the classrooms in Twin Cities in particular, in Minnesota in general? Here's the reason I asked the question. Last week, Brenda and I talked with a dear friend of mine. You may know him, Tyrone Terrell. He heads the African American Leadership Council at St. Paul, but he was on because we were all sort of being shocked by and giving voice to the anger in the community at the triple murders in St. Paul last weekend. And in the course of that conversation, we talked about how this propensity, this move towards accepting or experiencing violence is really a pandemic in and of itself, and particularly affecting school-age children. He said it's not uncommon now for a grade schooler to be able to, if he or she chooses, to think about getting a gun. One gripping story was that he said that he had talked to a teacher who reported that a student, after some kind of conflict in the classroom, told the teacher, "Don't make me go home and get it." And the threat the teacher understood was a threat to go home and get a weapon and bring to school. So the question is, how are we as families, as community, society, but also as educators, as institutions, failing our children? And what do we have to do to ensure that no child feels either bullied or in fear of his or her life, or willing to create fear in other students or teachers? How do we do that? What do you think, Dr. Traynham?
So I think there's a lot that goes into that. I mean, we have to acknowledge that, you know, violence is oftentimes bred out of not having our needs met, right? And so when our needs are not being met, there can be the propensity to do something violent as a way to get what I need, right? In order to access or to even release frustration or anger that I might experience because basic needs aren't even being met, right? And so I think one of the things that we do certainly across school systems is trying to have, right, universal minimally kids have food, right? That they're able to have something in the morning, they're able to have something in the afternoon, that there's programs after school for kids to be able to have productive things to go to. We recognize when students don't have anything to do, right? Idle hands, that impacts what they will ultimately get into if I don't have something that is productive and worthwhile. I think the other thing, and this is something that I used to talk about both as a teacher and when I oversaw a teaching and learning department, was helping to transition some of the education that we do to be about problem-based learning. What's happening within our communities and how do we use education as the tool for dismantling those things, right? And so often, well, when we approach education, it's not in a way that kids can necessarily see themselves connected. And part of the work that we have to do has to be for them to see themselves connected, understanding that the environment that they're in is not something that they created, right? And it is something that they can be a part of undoing, that they have the ability and a responsibility, right, to make the world around us a better place. And I think the more that we help young people and our educators look at education from how do I connect it to the experiences of my students, it actually changes how students see themselves, right, as part of not just being educated, but being an educator, right? That I am part of educating my community in things that they may not be aware of, taking the expertise that's within my community to build up my community. So often we look outside the community for answers when so often the answers that are needed actually reside right there within the community.
So, Commissioner Mueller, do we have the resources or the will to do that in our community? Did, for example, education in Minnesota get the amount of money it needs to do the best job it can do on behalf of children and families, particularly in a year where there's a massive budget surplus? Do we have the resources we need? And if we don't have them, what should residents, voters, citizens of Minnesota do to push and promote and secure the resources needed to fulfill the mission of education?
Well, I think that the short answer is no. I think that what we know is in this last legislative session, there was access to funding. And because there was not agreement reached and the session ended, that funding that we were looking for education in general did not move forward. There were funds that came through during the pandemic, and there's a belief that those funds should be enough to carry our schools through. And the truth is that that's inaccurate. That it created the opportunity to build programs to respond to the pandemic. We're in a place, though, in education where, because we have the will, because we do believe that each and every student matters, and that them coming to school, them having the education that they deserve, and our ability to meet their needs is paramount to not only their success as an individual, but to the success of our communities at large. Then what we need to do is we need to be able to fully fund the education that our students deserve. And so when we talk about the special education cross subsidy, when we talk about an English language learner cross subsidy, what we are talking about is the promises that both the federal government and the state government made to our systems and structures that have not been met. And so what we know is that it is not just that, but it is ensuring that we have the people in front of our students to reflect our students, that we have a system and a structure that our students see themselves in what they are learning and how they are learning, and does not shy away from an accurate reflection of who we have been as a country, who we have been as a state, and where we believe that we need to go, and then their integral role in making sure that we're able to do that. Shortchanging education now means that we are consistently going to be reacting, and instead we have an opportunity to not live in the tyranny of or we're going to fund this or we're going to fund this and live in a reactive state. We actually have the opportunity to live in the beauty of and. We are going to fund this, and we are going to fund this piece of education, mental health supports, and we are going to fund academic supports, and we are going to be proactive. And that's where we need to be.
It sounds like a recipe for equity, for inclusion, a recipe for students and families feeling a sense of ownership translating to accountability, and a sense of being at the table of decision. Do you see it that way, Commissioner?
I do. I think that our families play an integral role, is that we have been partners in this from the very beginning. As a classroom teacher and working and having the ability to work at a district level, we know that our students, their families, and their educators in their classrooms create this triangle of support around students. And we want our parents and families to be partners. And we also know that not each student has family support that every student that every student has. Every single family and every single student's home lives look different. And so what we need to make more actually consistent is what they have access to at school, and the participation that they have. That actually should be the constant, because the variables are what is happening outside of school. And what we need to be able to have our locus of control around is what we have within our schools and what we can guarantee for each and every one of our students and families. And then how do we also then provide some of those supports for out of school time?
Don Allen commented in the chat or the comment section that Minneapolis and St. Paul had a record number of dismissals or cut record number of Black and Latino teachers. And he says the system is broken. You cannot be what you do not see. Dr. Traynham, what about that?
I would say no lies told, right? That there's no lies that have been told there. The reality is we know it's important to see what you want to become. I mean, we saw this with the women's movement, Si Se Puede, right? Yes, I can. And as we as women said that we can be construction workers, we can be firefighters, we can, right? Seeing ourselves in those positions allowed for us to say, I can do this. And the same becomes true as we think about our students. We have to recognize as well the impact of desegregation, Brown v. Board of Education, and the reality that when that went into place, an unintended consequence was the cutting, right, of African American teachers in particular, as well as administrators that lost jobs overwhelmingly, and that ultimately has impacted and continues to impact to this day. When I don't see myself, it makes it difficult for me to believe that I too can be that. And we know that, when we saw Barack Obama become president, we had more little boys and girls who said, I want to be president, right? Because they can see something that they hadn't seen before. So representation is important. We have to acknowledge that and recognize that. And then the key becomes, what do we do as a way when we think about equity? Equity is not the same as equality, right? Equality is that everybody gets the same thing. Everybody gets shoes, right? And if it's a size 9, everybody gets a size 9. Whether it fits you or not, that's equality. But equity is saying everybody gets shoes that actually needs them, and you get the size that works for you. And what that oftentimes can mean is that people see equity as a zero-sum game, right? That somebody's getting something and I'm losing out on something, rather than seeing it as we all benefit as a result of it. And the example that I usually give when I'm having this conversation is curb ramps, right? You know, when you're walking down the street and the curb goes down, that came about because the federal government was looking at the inability for disabled people to access, right, sidewalks safely. And as a result of focusing on those with the most impact, everybody benefits from those curb ramps, right? Whether you're older, whether you're younger, whether you have a stroller, whether you hurt your leg, everybody benefits as a result of the focus on those who were most in need. And so understanding that equity is not a zero-sum game, that we all benefit, really would allow for us to look at some of the things that we see right now happening with who gets laid off, right? Most often our teachers of color are the last hired and the first fired. And so how do we have this conversation in a way that recognizes the hard work of teachers who are in place, as well as the need for representation for our kids to see themselves as a means, as one means towards success?
Brenda, any questions or comments? Brenda Lyle Gray is a career educator and always has important things to say or questions to raise about our children and their education. Brenda?
I do have a question, Dr. Traynham, about training and how the district is linking in with the area colleges that are trying to recruit new teachers coming in. How does that work? Because everything that I hear, it's the same old soup. And the academics, with all of the mental health problems we have, the drug problems, the parents, the economic, the housing, with all of this, it has to be no business as usual. It's got to be new business. How is that being addressed?
So we don't have a direct connection to the Office of Higher Ed in the sense of how colleges go about this, but the conversations are the same that's happening enterprise-wide, I would say. And when I say enterprise, I'm talking about the Minnesota state system, in the sense of, we recognize, to your point, that business can't be as usual, that every time we do business as usual, we maintain status quo. And so how do we instead recognize and help districts and schools to think about their training of teachers. So specifically to the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Center, one of the things that we have been doing that we've created is we've created an equity magnifier. And that magnifier is in this neat little bookmark. We made it as a bookmark. It's taken off of Portland Public Schools. We adopted theirs as a way to create ours, but it's a bookmark that has 7 questions that really has educators and district leaders to ask questions as a way to try to center equity in the decision-making that they're doing. So that's one kind of professional development that we offer. The other is we are rolling out something called a Getting Started series. And what that's meant to do is help districts and charters across the state that want to get equity work started within their system to answer the question of how do we get this going? What does this look like? And what do we do? Where do we start? And so that series is going to be coming out later this year. The last thing that we have is we created in partnership with the Urban League Twin Cities, as well as Minneapolis Public Schools, a document that's called the Minnesota Equity in Action Framework. And what that's meant to do is to acknowledge that there are equal partners in bringing about change in the system that's moving us towards operationalizing equity. And so it identifies parents, community, school boards, educators, district leaders, and school leaders in positionings that they have to say, these are things that you can be doing. It's not exhaustive. It's not meant to be exhaustive, but it's meant to give some ideas around, here's some things that you can be doing that when you build out yourselves as equal partners in this work, everybody has a stake in the game. Everyone has a responsibility in this, that it helps to operationalize equity within your spaces. And so we're going to be actually hosting in November an introduction to this document in partnership with the Urban League Twin Cities, that more information will be coming forward about that.
Commissioner, I know you have to leave shortly. Before you go, I called, I think, because I looked at the Due North, Minnesota's education plan, and I was pleased to see it. And that's kind of what I was referring to when I asked about what the state's vision, what the strategy is, what's the story right now. And if you would, because some people don't know about it, do an elevator summary of the governor's Due North Minnesota education plan and give the report on where we stand with that as we speak.
Well, thank you. And so the governor did come out just during the pandemic and prior to the pandemic with the Due North plan, which really helps to lay out what the administration's vision is. And that is to look at racial equity as well as demographic equity in the areas of education and educators being in the classroom, looking at ensuring that we are opening up pathways, ensuring that we are expanding what our students are learning and who they are learning from. Also ensuring that we are looking at funding that is reflective of what we need in the state of Minnesota for a fully funded education, and really is set to move as quickly as possible what we know that we value in each and every one of our students. And so we are making progress. Actually, we have been able to move quite a number of things in the Due North plan, but we have more to do. And what we want to be able to do is expand on where we have started, even within a pandemic, and to be able to go beyond that, because this is something that the governor and the lieutenant governor feel so strongly and deeply about, is that this is their education background, and truly believe that every time that we have the opportunity to think about our communities, the first thing that we think about are our children. And how it is that we create a system and structure that makes it better for them in every single way, every single day. And so we do have work to do. We have a long way to go. We've had a system and structure that has not been meant for every single student and has not reflected the diversity in the state of Minnesota. And what we are working toward is to ensure that we are building a pipeline of educators that are diverse, and partnering with our professional educator licensing board, as well as with the Office of Higher Education, to build education pathways, to build mentorship programs, and to ensure that every single student has access, that they are participating, and those students that are participating are representative of the student population.
How much ground was lost during the pandemic?
We lost quite a bit of ground, frankly. And there are places where we lost quite a bit of ground. And I think that there are other places where we actually gained some ground. And so I think what we were able to learn in the pandemic is how to shift an entire system in a very short amount of time, and that it can be done. I think we also learned that our students are more resilient than we ever give them credit for. And I think that we also learned that we have to provide as much support academically as we do social, emotionally, and in their mental health and nutrition than ever before.
Diana, any questions or comments?
Great conversation, my friend, Dr. Mueller and Dr. Traynham. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Commissioner, I just heard you, and for some reason it's bothering me. 40 years in education, so been there, done that. Proficiency where I live is 24% in math and 42% in literacy. Mm-hmm. So I know, but I'm bothered that there is no connection with higher education. Somehow this training has to be linked. When you have 87% of public school teachers, white, teaching 50% Black and brown students. I'm a governor's fan. I'm not beating him up.
Yeah.
The plan sounds great, but somehow if we're going to get, and especially Black male teachers, that's a key right now. Yeah. With the violence that's going on, we need males in the school. How do we attract them? We attract them by starting in junior and senior high school, right, and inviting them to look at the careers in education.
Right.
But we tie in to higher education, and you have some of the best colleges in Minnesota. Right there in Minneapolis and St. Paul. Why is it not linked?
We actually are linked in that space. I think that what Dr. Traynham was talking about was specific to EDI training. And we are linked with the Office of Higher Education as well as the Professional Educator Licensing and Standards Board. And so we are working with them now. We had legislation last year, which was to expand career pathways specific to education into middle schools as well as high schools. We are hoping to be able to move that forward again in this next legislative session. Also looking at being able to do, one is loan forgiveness in the office through higher education, but also recognizing that beyond loan forgiveness, that loan forgiveness happens at the end, and often inhibitors for our students are at the very beginning. And so looking at being able to provide access to free types of tuition if you've already started your education pathway in a middle school or high school. And so pieces like that actually are existing. We're also looking at building pipelines through our education specialists or paraprofessionals, having them come in as high quality educators, and then also building pathways through Grow Your Own. And so there are a number of different pathways. Actually, we're partnering with the Office of Higher Education on to build that pipeline, whether it comes from a middle school to a high school, somebody who's already who has been in a career and is coming to education new, somebody who is starting as a paraprofessional and wants to grow into that profession. And so looking at opportunities to have loan forgiveness, opportunities to have reductions in tuition as you're coming into the profession, abilities actually to also be able to look at the way that we license our teachers, because we know that the current exam oftentimes is not reflective of everything that they are learning. And so our Professional Educator Licensing and Standards Board is looking at a portfolio process instead of a straight up like a test. And so really looking at a more comprehensive approach in partnership. And so we do tie directly with the Office of Higher Education as well as with PELSB in order to do this work, because we feel like it's a chance to grow our own and to also acknowledge that there are people coming to this workforce who have expertise in content area but may not have the pedagogy. And so ways for us to be able to help to support the pedagogy as well. So there are a couple of places where we are intersecting with higher ed, and know that like we are inextricably tied, is that everyone looks at at K-12 and pre-K-12 as a place to grow the next group of people who are going to be working in our communities. And we have done an amazing job of building pathways based on the economic pillars of our community. But what we realize is that we are slow on the roll to be able to support that in education. And so we are ramping up our expansion of education pathways in our schools.
Well, you're not alone because, that's nationwide.
Right.
And COVID did that. But I think we've got to step beyond that. We've got to save these babies.
That's right.
Yeah, and Miss Brenda, my apologies. I was speaking to what we were doing from the EDI Center.
Oh, no, that's okay.
Thank you,
and your
Commissioner,
office
for
is gravely
Yes.
needed right
Yes.
now, Dr. Traynham. It's a lot to mesh together, knowing what the mental health is as a result of civil unrest and COVID, what's going on with parenting. You've got the GOP wanting to cut free breakfasts and free lunches. So principals and administrators and commissioners have to worry about that little nugget because these kids depend upon that food. But we also have to look at academics.
Yes.
In the relevancy, in the technology that can transfer over to meaningful jobs. It's not an easy fix, but for them to, last thing, I remember when Al interviewed Omar, Representative Ilhan Omar, and she said the word she used was incorrigible, to have tents continuing to be built across the street from the Capitol and to have them sitting on a $9.2 billion surplus and unwilling to help where it's needed. So, it's not an easy fix, but somebody has to speak.
That's right.
And that's what we do with Insight News and the conversation with Al McFarland. Sometimes people don't agree, and that's fine, but we have to talk about it. And I'm not even in Minnesota, but the education is there for me. And, my students watch this, some of my former students, and they ask questions. And when Al starts talking, they pull out dictionaries. So anyway, I wish you the best. It's not easy. And
let me ask each of our guest, our educators, if there's a final word. I know you both have to go. You're welcome to stay as long as you wish, but I want to respect your time, and I know that you have tight schedules. But Commissioner and Dr. Traynham, any final comments or charges for the community?
Dr. Traynham, would you like to go first, and then I can follow up?
Sure. I think what I would offer is recognizing that I say all the time to folks as we're doing training around EDI, is that this is not a race, it's a marathon, right? Like, this work is ongoing. We have to be willing to understand that commitment is not that your answer is coming within 30 days or coming within a year. Commitment means that this is the rest of your life, that you are holding to, that you are pushing forward, that you are constantly engaged in a way that you may not see the results yourself, but you are doing it for the future. And so I want to just encourage, right, our listeners to know that this work is not easy. It's difficult work, and this is a marathon. So stay on it. Don't give up.
I love that. And I've been telling people, Dr. Traynham, that we even have to elevate the length of our vision to say that this work that we're involved in may be the work of several lifetimes, and in that regard, it's okay that change is incremental, that it's hard, it's difficult, but it's doable, and therefore the notion of being guided by principles is all the more important. It's not the short-term gain, but it's the movement towards the long-term creation, establishment, protection, projection of equality, of equity, of our shared humanity, and the proper valuation of that by each and every one of us. Commissioner, last words from you.
Well, thank you. I think that while this is definitely a marathon, we also know that our children get one grade level one time. Mm-hmm. And there is an urgency around that. And they deserve our very best every single day. And so do their parents and their families who send them to us because they are sending us their very best. And so we have a moral imperative to do the right thing for each and every student. And when we know better, we need to do better. And there are times when we know that we cannot do this work alone. And it's more often than not that we cannot do this work alone. And we also know that we have to be courageous in our beliefs, and we have to be certain that in the work that we have devoted our lives to, our professional education lives to, in working with children, working with families, and ensuring that they have the education that's going to ensure that they can do whatever they want to and never inhibit them and in their beliefs and in their desires, then what we know is that we must continue to be courageous. We must continue to drive forward, and we must continue to be frank about where we have work to do and be honest about that. And then we need to ask for help. And so that is what we are asking for. We are asking that we continue to get the help that we need to have both the human resources and the financial resources to build the system and structure that the students in Minnesota deserve.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mueller, and thank you so much, Dr. Traynham. We invite you to come back as often as you wish. We want to keep our communities aware and apprised of progress being made. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. We appreciate your time.
Nice meeting both of you.
Nice meeting you as well.
Same here. You guys have a great day.
Let's pivot. We touched on the question of violence in the community, and we've got one of the people who's on the front line with discussing and problem solving in the area of youth violence. Princess Titus is here. Princess Titus, good afternoon. Jump in, start with talking about what we were just talking about, the impact and the role of the state's education apparatus to support our families and our children, but then talk as you would about things that you see happening, unfolding in community right now to address some of the crises associated with gun violence in our neighborhoods.
Thank you, Al, for allowing me this space. I'm Princess Titus. I'm one of the co-founders of Standard Edition Women, which is a collective of women who've used radical thinking to begin to live a standard edition of themselves based on their behavior and how it will impact their legacy. So when I listened to the conversation, I was once a licensed teacher and a mother who wanted to splash in puddles and bake cakes with my children. But when they stepped into the community, the police was wondering what were they doing. Other young men were wondering what they were doing. So really what we're trying to do on a grassroots level is use radical thinking to redesign a culture that we believe our children need to live in. Women who have endured the trauma of losing a loved one to substance use disorder, self-harm, or gun violence, may it be police or community, are often put in a situation where they don't think that they can be helped, but they want to help someone. And so to carve out a space for those women to do some intentional healing often puts them in a situation where they want to provide supportive services for someone else.
Did Lucienne come on today? Is she going to be with you? Do you know? Is she here? I don't think so. Okay, so let's just keep going. We've got some time for you to stretch out and sort of educate, share your passion. How has this past weekend, for example, this past week impacted you, and how does it impact children and our families? The heightened violence that we've experienced here that Brenda talked about in New Mexico. What happens in our families when we have this trauma?
And thank you for asking that question. And so as I talk to the 77 women I'm connected with who have all lost someone really important in their lives in a different way, some women shut it out and they don't stay connected with current events because it's challenging enough to remember to pay the light bill and to sign the paperwork for the children to go back to school or to open the mail. A lot of other women, like I said, are on the front lines. We've connected with some of the young people who are in the prison, who've been incarcerated because they've committed these crimes within a project we call All from the Inside. So coming home to North Minneapolis, which is where I lived and served for 27 years, and thinking about that corner or that area that definitely needs healing. When I talk to men who are incarcerated about that area, and do we need more policing, or do we need to just boycott the store that's in that area? They're concerned about the needs of the young children on that corner because they were once the young children on that corner. So they and it's really challenging, because we were just talking to people from the education system, and from my belief, education is about getting you to remember the way that we've shaped this world. And if we're really looking for true change, and that's what they're saying, it's this marathon that we're going to have to run of getting people to think about their thinking a little different. And so when do we start to not tell people information, but start to ask those people that are standing on the corner questions? And so these men have put together like a list of questions for me. They're almost like little fortune cookies, but it's like, do you remember what you wanted to be when you grew up? Do you know that your mother and your father loves you? Do you know what your name means? And they're just like flood the area with this information. And I'll come back and say, boots on the ground. I know there's churches that will come into that area and, talk to people about God. And they're like, no, that's not what we said. Because a lot of people have been through so much that maybe they're angry with their creator. So don't come to them with that first, but get them to leave them with something, so that when they're away and alone, that it can speak to them and they can remember themselves. It kind of reminds me of when you meet a person in their basic humanity. But for men who are in prison, who are kind of thrown away, so to speak, a community that doesn't get A1 service, A1 food. She was talking about how do we change the diet and the mental health needs of the young people in the education system. Often the mental health of the men who are incarcerated and the food that they get to eat is not a priority, right? So we know that to expand and prioritize those things, we need radical solutions. We need evidence-based practices, yes, but when are we going to stop trying those things we once tried? Because this is a newly evolved generation. One of the things we're doing tonight specifically, and I'll try to talk slower because I talk so fast, because my passion comes from actually my son losing his life to gun violence 12 years ago. Anthony Titus was hit by a bullet intended for another child 2 weeks after his 16th birthday. And I removed the street memorial and invited children to come to my home, not knowing that 759 children would come to my house.
Oh.
And I know that because I had, as a teacher, I always had like art supplies and stuff. So I put these big sticky papers up on the wall and allowed children to share stories or leave their phone numbers. And some years later, I read those, and there was 759 unique individuals and 60 repeat visitors. I lost my home, my lights went out, lost my car, lost my comfort and my safety in serving North Minneapolis, and then moved on to help start Appetite for Change, a food justice organization that uses food as a tool to create health, wealth, and social change. Thinking that food, if young people could eat different, that they could choose something different, because we know the neuropsychology of the way the body responds to food that calcifies the pineal gland. They're not making good choices. But then to go a step further into what I truly believe as an educator and a thinker is that the choices that they get, the options are given to them by the system. The options are given to them by white supremacy. The options are given to them by poverty. So they're still not able to get beyond A, B, C, and D to choose E, F, G, to live in abundance.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're hosting an event some of the women that I work with Standard Edition Women, we've partnered with Hawthorne and the YMCA Human Partnership, Community Health Improvement Partnership has funded us to be able to provide some services to families where we can create a space where we can talk about where are you in that circle. She said it, acknowledging where we are, right? And the choices that you get to choose from, activating your own personal power and choice based on your goals, but making sure your goals are fueled by your values. If we truly want to save our children, just to have the goal to make sure that my child like grows up and gets to college and, you know, follows the law and doesn't get shot, like we have to add that in there and say that intentionally because we value health, which means we'll do healthy things, we'll eat healthy food, we'll listen to healthy music, we'll go to places that are about health and healing, we'll heal ourselves. To offer self-care to our children takes for us to offer self-care to ourselves. So there's this beautiful intergenerational experience we've curated where the parents and children will eat together and then they'll do some separate work and then they'll come back and the children will offer something to their parents as a declaration of what they're choosing for themselves. The parents will reinvest and offer something to their children just to acknowledge that mitochondrial connection. And then we'll come back and stay in contact with those families. So we're hosting those September 12th. That's tonight. We'll have one September 19th at the one September 19th is actually at Big Brothers Big Sisters.
Mhm.
And then there's one September 26th at the Harold Mazzell North Community YMCA.
And the name of the presenting organization again and contact information?
Standard Edition Women, and you can reach out to me, Princess, personally. My phone number is 612-707-1123, or you can email us at standardeditionwomen@gmail.com.
Princess, we jumped right into the middle of a lot of stuff, and you have delivered a lot of great information. What I want to do, I've got about 10 minutes left, is sort of back up and go back to the beginning to contextualize all of the rich information and the quality content you've just shared. And so let me ask you to step back and tell your story. You said so much that I'm so curious about, and not a lot of time, but this is the beginning, and we'll be back together again. I think that we should keep talking, keep sharing, and model in our relationship what we have to be for each other in community. And so in that spirit, I want to ask you if you just step back and talk about who Princess Titus is, and where you have come from. Whose shoulders do you stand on, and what vision drives you? You mentioned one of the critical, painful points of your life, the loss of your son. Talk about that again too, and how all of that brings you to this moment.
And thank you for that, Al, for being truly a steward of the people, because often when you're in the trauma, that's how it is in your mind.
Mm.
It's just it's a clump of solutions. It's a clump of what happened. It's a clump of strength and all of that. So thanks for pulling me back and allowing me to just share where it comes from, and not, ostracizing me or making me feel as if that's not okay, because that's the space that I'm in. So 27 years ago, I left Chicago to come to Minnesota. I didn't know anyone here. I just knew, I said I'm a refugee from Chicago because it wasn't safe. And so I concerted my own efforts to get out of Illinois. And I just bought a ticket, either north or south. It didn't really make me a difference. I got off in Minnesota. I was just tired of being on the train. I could have got off in Washington because that was the next stop. And when I came to Minnesota, I was taken to the Dorothy Day shelter. I attempted to find housing in St. Paul, and I was told because I came from Chicago that I had to live in North Minneapolis. Because that's where people from Chicago go. So not knowing anything about redlining, or not even really growing up in Chicago, having experiences with white people, I thought it was community, and I saw hijabs and I heard Spanish, and I was like, whoa, people are together. Chicago was really still very segregated when I left. And when I came here, I got to stand on the shoulders of women like Raynell Jones, who taught at the Minneapolis Urban League Fresh Start Academy. I volunteered in my son's classroom, quit my jobs, and then I kind of tripped and fell into a teaching career. Stella Whitney West, who's over in North Point, was one of my mentors. Sylvia Lovelace Payne, all of these women. And then once I started Appetite for Change, I started to connect with people like Clarence Jones, who was just like, Princess, you're a connector of the people. You can coordinate it. Let's make sure you can get out and do the work in the area that you want to do it in. Having an early childhood, being born a teacher. I was born a teacher. I was teaching when I was 12. Being born a teacher, I've always been concerned with younger people. When I think about the information that I taught my 5-year-old 5 days after her brother was murdered, which was her 5th birthday, have prepared her to stay out of areas that are not safe for her. So instead of us not having these conversations with our children, we want to have those conversations, because as a mother, I had them with the boys. I had them with my daughter. I knew to talk to them about staying safe and picking your friends like you pick your fruit, and listening to your intuition and asking questions and checking with someone else, because that's how that's how I was raised. So even in my trauma, some of those things just didn't go away. And so now here I am, just making sure that the community has a space that they can stop and heal. And maybe I need it more myself, right? So even the women that I work with, they need it. So they want to offer it. And it takes some vulnerability and some courage to stop and say, hey, let's do some healing.
What's your lineage? Who are your people? Who do you come from?
My grandmother on my dad, both my grandmothers were born November 11th. I know, I can't make that up. My birthday was actually yesterday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. My mother is a McDaniel from Chicago, and my father's side is a Jackson from Chicago, from Deans Island, Arkansas.
Mm-hmm. Do you have ever get a chance to go back, grandparents, great-grands? Do you have an idea of your Africanness?
I have not. My daughter wanted that as a wish for her birthday, so we'll invest in that pretty soon here. I can't wait to find out, though.
Take a minute to talk about the circumstance of the murder of your son.
Anthony, it was the 4th of July. He had turned 16 on Father's Day, and it was really odd because I had just graduated Metro State, and as I was spending time with both of my children, my spirit was speaking to me like, which picture would you use for an obituary? And I just remember thinking that, and then thoughts passed, and he was supposed to go to a party for a young girl, 2-parent household, no drinking, no drugs, on 28th and Fremont. The young lady had a hard time graduating. She was one of my students in after school. And so the parents invited us, our family. So I sent Anthony to represent. I went to Minnehaha Falls to spend time so my daughter could spend time with her father's side of the family. And my son, Jesse, I had just took him to Hazleton and spent $5,000 for him to go to treatment for his chemical dependency issue. And they gave me my money back and told me that they could not serve him, that he should go to African Family Services, and gave me a printout of a sheet that was from like 2008. And AFS was not offering, chemical dependency treatment anymore in South Minneapolis. And so Jesse and I were together because I just wanted him to be healthy. And as we were walking up to view the fireworks, someone said, Fat got shot. And I turned around, and the world that was once in front of me, to be able to go take my last teaching test and be a teacher and pay off my house, and a house with a white picket fence. I wanted to paint black because my president was black. That's not the life I have now. So we turned around and we drove from North Minneapolis, South Minneapolis to 28th and Fremont. And I remembered attempting to run through the yellow tape, and the police grabbed me and they put my son in the car. And then I thought, why did you do that? And the only thing I could think of is that I had seen it on TV, women run through the yellow tape. Mm-hmm. And so I felt tricked by programming. I felt offended by racism in television. And I walked the perimeter, because the perimeter around a crime scene goes 2 blocks. And everyone was right here and their blinders were on. And I went to the behind the building barefoot, and I saw him. And the police told me they would arrest me because I was standing on an abandoned building, so I was trespassing. And I said, but I think that's my son. Arnetta Phillips was with me from Shiloh Temple. She's my daughter's grandmother. And Sherman from the city came and told me how the process would go. And so once the van pulled up, it was no longer a crime scene, not to disrupt the crime scene. After the van pulled up, I walked through the yellow tape and asked all of the children to hold hands and make a circle and just say thank you and give thanks, because we knew him. And so they did that, and they weren't sure why I was saying say thank you. And neither was I, but just knew to, in all things, give thanks. That's what my creator says.
Well, so let's close with this. The future that you are writing right now, I see you as a person who's committed to understands that you have a role to craft, to write, to author a future. What is it that you're writing as we speak?
I want to say we're writing something for middle school age children. It's time to start having the conversations with our younger people in an age appropriate way. If I can talk to a young person and they know about a blunt or a switch or a condom or some of the grown-up things that they know about, being that they're exposed to so much through social media or just access to the internet and the World Wide Web, then it's time for us to talk to them about options and solutions, and to let them know that they are the person.
It's 2:00.
That's in the school to prison pipeline.
Okay, I'm not sure where that came from. It's 2:00. Is that an announcement in your school or something, or what?
I have to have reminders.
Okay, that's where it is. Okay. Well, listen, it's an appropriate reminder because we have to close the show at this time. Princess, thank you so much. Blessings to you, gratitude to you, and may the ancestors and the spirit guide you and protect you in every way. I'm Al McFarland. This is The Conversation. We'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Peace.